So, Beena, one remarkable thing about you that I have realized is that you got into this field of data science and not particularly AI, even data, very early days, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And it was
And
very easy. Are we jumping in? Because
yeah. No, no. My question is, you got into that very early days, but during that time, did you thought that this technology will evolve in the way it is right now?
no, no, not at all. And do you, so Jibu, have you officially started
Yes, we
the
have. Okay, I will ask a
let's
question again.
officially start and ask me the question again,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
I will
Okay,
answer it
excellent,
properly.
excellent.
Okay,
Okay.
start.
We will start. Uh, Beena, you are one of the people who entered the whole data science academy or data science area very early, in early
Yeah.
90s as well. And my question is, when you were working in this area of data science in the 93, 94 areas, or you were participating in this as an academic, where we were
Yeah.
studying as well,
Yeah.
have you thought this whole stream, data and AI and ML become what it is right now?
Not at all. Not at all. I just realized I was very good at math and it just came naturally to me. So I didn't have to, put too much effort into it. I would just get, the answers right away. I don't know what it was. So I chose to go down this new, and at that time, Jibu, honestly, computer science was a new area for studying in India. It was, I think I was a third batch or so who, had a focused degree on computer science. So not much precedent. It was new. It was unknown. I have to share this with the audience. My parents were not very happy because it was not the engineering or medical, the typical. This was back in the late 80s, so it was, the expectation was, if you're good, then you go doctor or engineering. And I said I really want to do computer science. It seems like most subjects are on math, and I just thought I'd cruise through college and without having to study much. And for knock on wood, it did turn out that way. I didn't have to I didn't have to put in too much effort to understand, that whether it was compiler construction or theoretical computer science or software engineering. I was very, it was very easy for me to pick up. But I also realized, anything that, we had a subject around advanced database systems. And this was at that time, this is like, we are talking about DBase and Lotus and FoxPro, which I don't think many of your audience will even remember. But I just got it right. So that's why when I got my first job, I latched on to the fact that I want to focus on the data space, because I seem to have an instinct and intuition, or a way to work with it. So I started out as a developer, really SQL developer, SQL server, which is that's what we had. And worked, really focused on the data aspect. I certainly didn't plan it. It was all of those, now looking back, having the maturity of looking back, I realized, I did the right thing because I focused on my strength. Right. And my strength was in, understanding database systems. And I just, my first job was as a database developer, SQL developer, went on to become a DBA, kind of grew through the ranks, led, became a manager leading a data team. And then, what I had studied back in college, where it was mostly textbooks, right, on artificial intelligence, or how Lisp and some of these, it was very much theoretical. And I remember we used to, and this would be in 95 or so, and doing my first initial jobs, and we would hear about all this, all the advances happening, and we would debate, oh, in the future someday you're going to, when you're driving on the road, you're going to see banners which are personalized to you. All the, this was a time when, there were no electronic banners. This was paper or painted or printed and pasted banners, right? And that seemed so much in the future, that having personalized ads as you're driving down the freeway was like, that's never going to happen. We were just imagining things. But and remember, this was also the time when Hotmail was just invented, right? So it was not easy access to email or information. It just wasn't there at that time. You know, 5 years, 10 years later, the world had now become all about data warehousing and BI, and you were getting being able to organize data in a way that you could report better on it. There was reporting capabilities which didn't exist just 5-10 years ago, which now was being used by every business. So moving from that transactional databases to then the BI world, that was a very natural step. And then Hadoop came into play, and now that was a pivotal moment where personalization was just normal, right? We live in a world where now, even talking to you about this, it seems like we were even limited in our imagination at that time. And I've totally dated myself here because this is a few decades ago. But we were even limited in what we could imagine, right? Every time technology advances, we try out a few things and then you figure out, oh, there are more things you could do with the exact same technology, right? So it was been absolutely fascinating, and for some reason I think it was sheer luck that I chose data, and it is one of those areas which just has exploded. And now being able to build AI solutions, lead AI teams, work at companies where I'm bringing value with AI and data, it's never could have imagined.
I
Never.
think I think that was your experience was a case with many of the people back then. I spoke with some of the academicians also when they were doing reinforcement learning back in the 94 or 95. People don't understand. I think you will be also looked upon as what is this person doing, right? Which
Yeah.
is not the normal stream, right? Stream of studies, right? Back then.
Yes, and it was like definitely programming, traditional programming, software language programming. That knowing C and C++ plus plus was considered the cool skill sets, not the database skill sets. Right? Definitely, I definitely saw experience that as well, and now that has become commodity, and the data space has just exploded.
So, I mean, a few days back, I was reading about. I mean, I have a background in history. I studied
Yeah.
international history and international relations. So, I was reading about the perceptron by Rosenblatt in the 1950s, which is like an early form of AI. Which didn't work out. So, I was thinking how quickly this whole uh, technology exploded and the impact it is making, right? And you being one of the person who gets this, how do I say, this front seat view on what is happening in every industry. So you have mentioned that the industries, especially the sectors where data collection is a norm, will be getting the initial advantage, right?
Yeah.
And then there are the traditional industries where the whole data is not captured. I mean, there's no like I'm quoting you. There's no incentive to capture data, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
coming to India, we are a country where the traditional industry is
Oh,
predominant, right?
yes.
We
Yeah.
know the fact that 50% of our workforce is engaged in agriculture,
Yes.
and which it contributes 18 to 20% to our GDP. So,
Yeah.
how do you think the whole this AI, the adoption, this rapid adoption, and the automation, and considering that we have a huge youth population, is going to affect our country? And what is your recommendation on how we can ensure we will come out as a winner on this?
Yes, yes, no, and it is so true. Everything that you just quoted, right? Traditional industries are definitely going to lag behind because we just have never looked at it from a data perspective, right? And I think that there are several ways, and I'm betting on the youth of India to figure it out, because here's the thing: even not only the youth but the farmers, everybody has a phone. They're all familiar with using, whether it is for WhatsApp or for messaging. They're using it in their daily lives to some extent. So that digital literacy level has definitely gone up compared to 10 years ago, right? There is
Right.
access, there is the digital literacy has naturally risen. So a little bit of incentivizing to make sure that you can digitize the farms to some extent, being able to add in sensors, doing that some foundational work where you can start capturing data is going to get us farther than when you looking at it as this massive problem that needs to be solved at a massive complex problem to solve for, right? Think of it as something as it's not just about AI. The general population is very familiar with technology today. So how do you provide basic sensors, provide an app on the phone possibly to capture the data, right? Provide a form to capture the farm workers' data, the farmers' data. How do you make it easy to capture data and engage that audience in a way that you get that data pipeline set up, right? Once you solve for the data pipeline, then it is easy to the AI part is actually easy if you can solve for the data pipeline. The other good news is you can also start with the farms that are more receptive, right? I'm a big believer in starting small and then solve for it and then scale it out and productize it. So the more you can incentivize youth or companies or entrepreneurs on focus on these specific industries and solve for it with some infrastructural support, I think the more progress and faster progress you're going to see.
So the data pipeline is critical to bring these traditional industries into the modern age, as you pointed out. But how do you? So there is this whole question. I think I was few days back. I was in a call with OECD AI team, and they were asking me about how do Indians perceive AI, right? Normally, there is a perception. Now, do you perceive like the whole Terminator way, or do you perceive in a Matrix way? So then it made me think, I took some time for me to answer. How do Indians perceive AI? And the thing is, we perceive AI as a job issue, right? As a, is it gonna take my job away? Is it gonna create jobs, right? I
Yeah,
mean, there are new job streams that are being created. There are so many new companies
yeah,
starting up which focus on data labeling. Data
yeah,
labeling and analytics is
yeah,
becoming a industry its own in the recent years. At the same time, many blue collar people will be, has to reskill themselves.
yeah.
So how do we address this whole problem of this reskilling and upskilling in India?
Yeah, and it has to be a program that you launch and make available for every citizen. I
Yes.
remember again, I'm not a trained historian like you, but I'm a history buff, so I like to look at the past and learn from it, and then move to the future, right? More informed. So I remember, and this was when I was very young, right? That we were going through that challenge of, not educating enough girls. Girls were
Mhm.
not getting educated, and parents would send the boys for the education. And a program was introduced where girls' education was going to be free up to 10th standard. That changed the whole narrative, right? It made, when it's free and easily available, it is much easier for every citizen to be involved, and that got more girls educated. At least that program prompted it. And I think you have to take a similar approach of, how do you make these reskilling training available, and how do you make it accessible, and then how do you incentivize so that people use it? How do you make it fun? It should not be, it doesn't need to be where you have to go to a classroom and sit and learn. It can be a game on your phone where you're learning about AI, right?
Right.
And basic, it should be part of the basic digital literacy. Look, I don't think anybody trained anybody on how to use the phone, right?
Mhm.
Like I agree that my parents still struggle on some of the complicated apps, but they know how to make a call from these smartphones, right? So how do you provide basic AI literacy as part of the digital fluency national program? That's what's going to change the how people perceive AI, because when it's an unknown factor, there's always fear. And I think a part of it is just removing that unknownness and educating everybody on what is basic AI. And Jibu, you probably know this already, but that is the intent with my nonprofit I started called Humans for AI. Is
I
how
really want to segue to that since you mentioned, I was saying you mentioned about the girl education issue
yes,
we had. And we still face some of those challenges. Like
yes,
for Women's Day, we had a panel of 11 brilliant girls from India who
yeah,
were doing some work in AI, and they were also explaining the challenge. So that actually, I was thinking about bringing, asking a question about Women's for AI. And I mean, you've been a very strong advocate for diversity in AI. So
yes.
can you explain the work of Humans for AI and what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look, I've always been an advocate for getting more in girls and women into technology, because usually I'm the only woman at the table and that needs to change, right? But once AI started becoming real, and I was setting up my first data science team, and I realized, my first few hires, they were mostly men and I was the only woman for a team that I was building, right? So how do you change? That's when I realized I need to be more aware and need to make a decision. Here's why. Because a lot of what we're doing with AI is encoding, automating human decision making. To some extent it is about human intelligence and encoding parts of it, right? So if we don't have that diversity at the table who is designing or developing it, then that AI is just going to be incomplete. Yeah, it is
Yes.
going to be biased, it is going to be unfair, but in general it is just going to be an incomplete AI because not it has not been looked at from different lenses. So, and we've seen enough scenarios, enough headlines where that happens, right? So the idea behind Humans for AI really came to the fact because of, I realized that you need to, this is important, and I didn't see anybody focusing on solving it the way Humans for AI is addressing it. I don't think, anybody who has been part of a data science team or has built data science teams knows that, you don't need everybody to be a data scientist on your team to build an AI solution or an AI product. You need designers, you need UX, you need QA, you need product managers, you need project managers, you need subject matter experts and domain experts. So, let's not try to teach everybody coding. Let's not try to make everybody, learn about AI by, learning about math or statistics or machine learning, but surround this homogeneous group with diversity, whether, because then you can pull in the artists, the nurses, if you're building a healthcare product, right? You can build in different skill sets by providing them a basic AI literacy, just by for them to understand what does machine learning really mean, what does reinforcement learning really mean, get going beyond those buzzwords to actually helping them understand the meaning. So that base level AI literacy can help them then leapfrog into a career working with AI products. And if we focus on, this literacy program on women and underrepresented minorities, then it's a win-win, because now you can have a homogeneous group of data scientists, but you're surrounding them with women and people of color and different backgrounds and different economic backgrounds. I think that is a win-win, because you're solving for two problems, right? You're making your AI more complete, more good, more fair, but you're also getting diversity into the AI teams.
So one, since diversity is a very very important issue, and one thing I have noted is, see, many of these AI programs or let's say models that have been created is for a global deployment,
Yeah.
and the representation, for example, especially women from global south, the representation of them in whether about its development or in the whole say is very few, and for example, there's also disparity, right, between the
Yeah.
the the economies as well, right? So how do we ensure more participation from women from not just the west but from India or from Nigeria or Brazil?
Yeah.
They get their say when it comes to when it comes to creating the frameworks, the regulations,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I know you're a very prominent proponent of AI ethics as well. How do we bring their voice into this
Yeah.
conversation?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it is that basic AI education, basic AI literacy that organizations need to provide specifically to the groups that, that don't proactively go and learn, or that don't have the time to learn. But how do you incentivize for them to, have that skill set? Like just the basic ones, not expecting them to code or become data scientists, but be able to engage in a discussion, or be able to vote on an AI regulation, right? You
Right.
need to understand base level AI. So, Jibu, I don't know about your parents, but my parents don't understand much about what I do, right?
Right.
But I've been on a lifelong mission to now make sure they understand the basics, but it's hard. But that's what countries need to do. That's what companies need to do to make sure everybody understands, has a base AI literacy, so that we can all be part of this. And that's where, otherwise we're going to leave people behind. If they don't understand it, they won't participate in it, and that will again lead to bigger challenges. And that's to your point, that's why I'm so passionate. Even though I'm a technologist by training, I'm very extremely passionate about ethics and trust in AI, because I truly believe that AI can do a lot of good for humanity, but we also need to think about the negative aspects of it and mitigate it early on.
I think about the parents part. I think I gave up on my parents, so I think they also gave up. I was a journalist before, so now I tried explaining. I think they failed in conveying that to others. When others ask what your son is doing, they just say he's a journalist. So it's an easy way of answering things. But you mentioned a lot about ethics and trust, which brings to your book, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on that. And I think I'm patiently waiting for 22nd of March. What is your? I mean, you mentioned your how motivated you are with the passionate about the whole AI ethics and trustworthy systems. But my question is, what actually motivated you to pursue a book? And I know I don't want any spoilers, but what is the key message of the book?
Yeah, I think part of it is there's obviously a lot of topic about discussion about, on ethics, and my experiences have been in a variety of industries, right? And not just one specific industry. And I have realized that ethics can mean different things for different companies, and we have to really solve for it. We have to move from this high level headline catchy headline level, go down into the weeds, right,
Mhm.
to be able to solve for it. Here is why. Because if you are using like, what do you think about when you hear about ethics? What comes to mind? What does ethics mean for you? AI ethics, what comes to mind?
So when I speak about
Fairness.
ethics, mostly a little bit of philosophy comes into mind, right?
Yes.
And there are a lot of aspects. I mean, I had the fortune to review some of the papers for AI and Ethics Journal, right? They speak
Oh,
about the
okay. So you're more
theory.
educated then. Okay. Then you don't.
Yeah,
But usually it does come. You hear a lot about fairness and black
fairness,
box and transparency, right?
accountability. Yeah.
Accountability. So what I've realized is it's important to it is so. For example, take fairness, right? If you're not working with human data, that AI solution is not working with human data, fairness is probably not as important, right?
Mhm.
If you are working with human data, then fairness is super crucial, right? So think about if you're using AI to predict when this laptop will fail, right?
Right.
And raise a warning, right? Then human data, fairness doesn't really come into the picture. And but if you're using it to provide patient care and or diagnosis, fairness is absolutely important. So and this has been shaped by my background. Or let's take one of those controversial ones on facial recognition, right?
Yes.
We hear a lot about that, and yes, it is it is there are issues with it. But if you it depends on the context where you're using that AI technology, right? So facial recognition in a law enforcement scenario or in a justice system where fairness can ruin somebody's life, absolutely, you need to figure it out. But if you're using facial recognition to unlock your phone,
Hmm.
or to prevent improve worker safety on a factory floor.
Right, right.
Probably, probably okay, right, to use it in that scenario. So it comes down to that organizational level, that use case level, and to make that informed decision on what parts of ethics and trust is important for my organization, my stakeholders, and how do I put those guardrails in place. So really the book is really about moving from those philosophical discussions to how do you make it real in the real world within
Right.
organizations, whether it is a business or a startup or a government, right? It gives you those tangible tactical ways to think about these different philosophical concepts and how, making it real in and in today's world, right? Obviously regulations are going to come there, there are going to be regulations coming, but I think it's going to be a balance of, there is some level of self regulating as well that will need to be involved, because we're in this interim period because regulations don't exist. But at the same time, you cannot let AI go rogue everywhere. So it
Hmm.
needs to hit a balance of, how do you self regulate while the regulations are coming, and I think over time we will figure it out.
Eagerly waiting for your book, Beena, and I'm sure it add value to all the readers. I mean, a good
Yes.
book can give a lot of insight rather than how many conversations. I mean, it's an essence, right? It's a more concentrated form of wisdom, as you say. Coming to your other work, I mean, we spoke about your book and the diversity work. I want to know about the Deloitte's work, which is a main point of your focus. Can you tell me the work that's happening right now with the AI,
Yeah.
institute, and what are the projects you are involved in?
Absolutely. So, so I lead our Deloitte AI Institute. It's a global institute with all different regions involved. And what our focus is really to focus on applied AI and all of its different dimensions. So mainly, being able to look at research and see how does it apply to banks or hospitals, and then what are the nuances around it. So really bringing in that intelligence and trends, like where are certain industries heading? What are currently companies doing in this space, so that we can all learn together? And then going into these fuzzy areas like ethics and regulations, and what kind of governance needs to be in place? What kind of talent do you need? How do you bring in the right talent? So a lot of the applied AI aspect is covered under Deloitte AI Institute. I also focus on our obviously on trustworthy AI, but also on our ethical tech. What does ethics mean for emerging technologies? We are all
Right.
talking about AI ethics, but there are other technologies coming at us very rapidly, whether it is the metaverse or NFT and blockchains, right? And those technologies are all cool, but there are going to be negative implications for those technologies as well. So how do you think of that? Unlike so that we avoid what we happened with AI, where we're trying to play catch up, right? But while the technology is still in its nascent phase, can we figure out what does ethics mean for metaverse, for example? Who's going to be left behind? What are the parameters we should be considering, and put in those guardrails early on while the technology is driving value. So I think so those are the areas that I focus on at Deloitte, and it has been very exciting to be at the forefront and looking at all emerging trends, and even looking at trends that don't exist, like ethical technology.
So we discussed a lot about the ethical technology, the trustworthiness, and you mentioned the need for guardrails for this, emerging technology from an ethical standpoint of view. So one big question we regularly been hearing is a regulation, or how do I say, framework. Like EU came up with a framework for
Yeah.
AI. UNESCO has a responsible AI
Yes.
charter. So what is your stand when it comes to creating this framework? So my question
Yeah.
is, are we
Yeah.
late, or is it the right time for that? And secondly, how we will ensure that there's a global representation. If you are
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
one big framework for all, I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
one thing fit for all, but how we will achieve that?
Yeah, I think as long as we think that there will be a global framework, it will be very hard to solve for it. I think we have to look at existing regulations or existing frameworks, and how do you, where AI is a factor, because what AI is really doing is looking at improving the current industries, right? If you look there, like if you say, for example, you look at healthcare, there are already laws and regulations around it. What we need to do is look at how is AI impacting healthcare, and how do we extend out that law to cover the implications of AI or any other emerging technology as well. Frame to your point also about frameworks. I think frameworks are a good starting point, because at least it raises awareness, it gives a level of structure, and my hope is it's also driving best practices, because it is impossible to have a one size fit all, because AI is so context specific, use case specific. So it is impossible to if we think that the framework is going to fit every possible scenario, that's going to be really hard to operationalize in the real world. But the frameworks are a good starting point, and when you there, which companies, which startups especially, can start using it within their enterprise, within their company, to make to think about ethics early on. We've lived too long in the era where we've focused on only how do I get value from this technology, or how do I get value from AI. And I think the frameworks, the discussions, all the work that you're doing is raising awareness on, yes, there's great value, but there's also some other things that you need to think about, which will help you get even more value, because you're going to avoid reputational risk, or brand damage, and there's financial impact and fines as well that could come in. So I think just being aware and addressing those upfront is super important.
Conclude with a few remarks. I think one of the main points you have iterated, in our conversation, is the need for to have a education, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's when we speak about education in AI or AI education, it's always focused around building data science background, or are teaching our Python. It's more about the fundamentals, right? Fundamental basics on how it can affect us, how you can use these technologies, and that's a very valuable point, Bina. And things that it's a point most of us has overlooked, including me. And and it's a very insightful experience for me to have this conversation with you. And I'm sure it will provide a lot of value to our readers and our listeners. And I'm so looking forward to reading your book. And thank you very much, Bina. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Vibhu, thank you so much. And for your readers, there is website trustworthyaibook.com, or beenaammanath.com, that you can stay connected with me. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I know we are already connected, but would love to hear from your audience.